and a couple of screws down here. You can put all those to one side. You don't put anything in those holes, you just leave it. In these two holes, in the box of bits, there'll be two shorter screws that you can put in the place of the screws that you took out. Down here are two more transit brackets that were just holding these drip trays on. You remove those two yellow transit brackets and you put these supports in their place. Obviously these supports are to support this tray here, and there's additional bolts on this tray to bolt it to the machine. On this end of the machine you'll see there's a piece of trunking that's tied up out the way for transiting the machine. When you get it, you release all that, and then you'll find in the box some collets which clip over the end of the pipe and connect it to the machine. The collets just clip together, and then there's a safety clip that goes over the top, a little red safety clip, and that'll hold the pipe in position. You have a sizable length of flex with the machine. You do need to put that through a piece of conduit, or maybe you'd run a complete new piece of conduit or armor flex to the machine. It's obviously 3 phases, but there's a neutral connection as well. The blue wire is the neutral. You must connect the neutral up. In your box of bits you'll have all the things you need to do the machine. Obviously keys for the control cabinets, and amongst this are some very large jacking screws which you can use for jacking the machine to get it square. Obviously you put a piece of plate underneath and screw against the plate rather than the concrete. And while you're down here you can see the hydraulic tank. When it comes to you, to avoid oil coming out of the tank because it's vented, you have a plug in the top of the tank just there. Remove that plug and replace it with a vented one here, which will be in this box. Well, changing the blade, I'm sure you've done this on other machines. I'm not going to go right through the whole rigmarole with it. I'll just show you the obvious things. Take the tension off the blade with the handle at the end. Then using gloved hands you can remove the blade thus far and then knock the blade out of the guides as the last manoeuvre, and then you can pull the machine off. In order to do that you have to remove this guard completely and lower this swarf brush, which is a screw here. Obviously putting the blade on, you put it into the guides first, over the band wheels. I know it doesn't look like it, but you can get the blade down through there. Then move this up so it's just meshing with the blade once you've tensioned the blade up. Tensioning the blade. Obviously you use this handle and you literally do the handle up until it just feels tight, and that'll be the correct tension every time. The reason for that is there's some collapsible spring washers here which when they flatten out it's the correct tension. This is all being calibrated at the factory, so you literally do it up until it just goes tight on you. Right, filling up the coolant tank. Just to show you, this whole tray comes out. It's a drip tray plus a filter. You can take this out for cleaning. The coolant tank is here. It's a good idea to change the coolant every sort of 3 months. There's a level plate there. Don't want to be filling up any higher than the level of the plate that the pump is mounted to. You might find it easier to pour the coolant in there while watching the level here. The controls here, obviously this is the emergency stop switch. In order to make the machine work you must make sure that's twisted and pulled out. The machine won't work at all until you've switched on the isolator on the back of the main box at the bottom of the machine. When you turn that on, it's ready to go, and you can press start here. You'll then see a yellow light come up. The machine won't work at all until you've pressed that. If you can't get that yellow light to go out, it's probably because one of the guards isn't shut properly on the machine. So make sure all those guards are closed. Or it may be that the blade has broken or come off the machine, in which case there's a switch which is BP2 on the end of the bow. That switch may not be made, so you must make sure the blade's on there and tightened up. This is the blade speed. You'll see the blade speed come up on the control panel. We would say around 70 meters a minute for mild steel and around 30 meters a minute for stainless as a guide. naturally this is the starting of the cycle of the machine. The machine will go into action when you press that, and obviously stop if you wish to there. Right, there's two modes of operation with the machine. Obviously manual mode, so you can operate the machine manually, put it into position, open and close the vice, that sort of thing. And then the semi-automatic. On the manual mode, you turn this switch to the left and you can operate the machine manually. So you can adjust the bow for different heights. You might want to get the bow in a position to change the blade, for instance, which you can do on here. And you can obviously clamp and unclamp your material, like so. It's worth remembering that when the machine's in semi-automatic mode, it will unclamp the work and reclamp. But obviously to do the first cut, you would put the work in the machine and clamp it up, and then from then onwards the machine will unclamp and clamp itself. The blade speeds are shown up here and will only show when the blade motor is actually running. So when you started the machine, you can adjust it here. I mentioned earlier 70 meters a minute for mild steel, 30 for stainless. That's an approximation. You do need to talk to us, tell us what you're cutting, we can advise. So to start the machine when you're in semi-automatic mode, all you have to do is press this button here, but you do need to remember that that has to be in the 1 position before you can do it. If ever you need to stop the machine in a hurry, you've got that button and the emergency stop button here. Initially, when you start the machine, the computer will be completely off and you'll need to switch it on here, and it'll take a few seconds for the computer to boot up, and then you'll be ready to start the machine. So I'm going to put a program in and set the machine up like I'm cutting something. So I've decided today I'm going to cut something 200 millimeters square. At the moment it's 235, so it's above the job, so I know it's not going to crash into the work or anything. I shall leave it there because it won't take long for it to come down and touch the work. Obviously I load the work into the machine and clamp it. Now I need to decide how many pieces. I come into here, 3 pieces, enter. That's set to 0, which it should be, because if it isn't, you need to zero it. Press the button and zero it. And really I'm ready to go. I've just got to make sure this switch is clamped in the 1 position. I set this to semi-automatic and then I press start, and it should be 3 pieces at 200 millimeters square bar. Right, just a word about blades. Obviously it's important to use the right blade for the job. You can always speak to us and we can recommend the right blade for the purpose that you want the machine for. We've added on this machine a special micro lube spray unit. This puts tiny little bits of vegetable oil on the blade. It means that you don't end up with coolant all over the floor. This is such a minute amount of oil goes on the blade, but it's highly lubristic and does the trick, saves a lot of heartache. Above the blade here, and the same on the other guide arm, is a special valve. It's an adaptive valve. At the moment we set that up how you would normally cut beams, and you can override them. You can actually wind them up so that the machine will come down with a lot more force. At the moment the machine is set in a sensitive fashion so that when you're cutting through the middle of a beam, for instance, the machine will actually slow down, and when you, for instance, you're cutting the flat on the piece of box section, the machine will actually slow down through the work. So this makes the machine more sensitive if you leave it in this position. If you were cutting very, very high alloys, stainless steel, that sort of thing, you might need to force the blade through to a certain extent. So you'd let the blade speed come down very slow, let the blade bow come down very slow, but have a lot of pressure on it. But I say for most people that are cutting fabrications, which means mostly fresh air, as you know, so you set this up quite light so that it goes through gently without damaging the blade. Right, as the machine miters both ways, you can move the vise to one side or the other. Obviously, if we're mitering the bow coming round this way, this vise needs to be moved out the way to this side. There is a support here which is correct for the vise being over there. If you slide the vise over this way, you can take the support off and put it on that side. In order to swivel the machine round, there's a clamping lever here. I'm pulling that towards me, and then the machine will swivel round. To zero the machine, there is a dead stop here. And just move it up gently to the dead stop, making sure that it's done up tight here. For setting purposes, the initial position is here for setting purposes. When you go to set the miter angle for initiation, in other words, say first thing in the morning or beginning of the week, it's always best to check all this. So this is a zero position, and then after you've checked it in this position, you check it in that position, and it will come up on the computer at 60 degrees with this block down in this position here. And you set it on the computer, and I'll show you that in a minute. Then after that, you leave the block up in the air and you come round to this position, 60 degrees the other way, touching it at 60 degrees, and you press the button on the computer there. Right, for initiating the machine, for zeroing the machine when you go to use it, and also for any miter cutting, you press this screen here, very small screen, and it comes up nice and big like this. Then, as I mentioned earlier, that block I showed you for the zero position, the initiation position, you undo the clamping lever and move the machine up against it so it's just touching it nice and gently, and it should come up as zero. If it doesn't matter, it'll come up as zero when you press the set button. So you press the set button like that. Then you push the machine away from that stop so that it's mitering to the right, if you like, and it should come up at 60 degrees at that point. Then you press the plus set button like that. Then, and only when you've done that, the metal stop that I showed you, you unclamp it and move it into the vertical position so it no longer does anything, doesn't stop the machine from moving the other way. So now we move the machine completely the other direction to 60 degrees the opposite angle until it just touches the bump stop, and it should be reading 60 there. And you press the set on the left hand side of the screen, minus there. And the machine is ready. And then if you move the machine, you'll see all the angles coming up for you, whatever you want to do. And then you can clamp it off with whatever.